Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to give you examples of how to write your own CSS to modify the styling of the application. Now, if you look at the application screen here, you see different styles being applied for different elements. You see the font colors, the font sizes being different for different elements, the border, the background color. For example, a read-only has a gray background, a double field has a white background. You see different color for the buttons. The buttons have the borders here, some border radius. So all this are actually coming from theme aurora.css that Siebel provides by vanilla. Now, if you want to override those particular styles, you need to understand the basics of CSS. So you can select elements in CSS, and those elements uh, you need to define particular styles that you want to override. So to select an element, we need to identify that particular element in this HTML document. So for that, let me open the developer tools. So this is the HTML that you see. This is the HTML that is getting rendered for this particular view. So if you look at this, we need to identify a particular element that we want to change. So for that we use the select element. This arrow here, you can say select this particular button here, and we can add styles. You can add styles in the style tab. So to identify an element, or to identify a group of elements that match our criteria, we need to have particular selectors. So there are multiple ways to select an element. One is by using a class. So this element, for example, has all these classes that are separated by a space. So if we say class CBI control button, this element will get selected. If class is show pop-up, then it will get selected. Applet button, this will get selected. So single element can have multiple classes separated by a space. The same single element will have only one ID. You can see the ID here, one ID, and that element can have multiple um, attributes, like we see the name attribute here, the data display attribute, title attribute, area label, sequence, and other attributes as you see here. So we can select elements based on the classes, IDs, uh, and attributes, and we can select elements based on the element type. So I can select all the button elements in the screen by saying just button. So all the buttons in the screen will get selected. So let me give you an example of how to write the CSS. Now I am in my new theme here. As you can see here, I have used some selector to select all the drill down class items that has anchor tag, and I have given the color as red. So to select a particular element like a button, you can use the button class, just the button selector, and it will select all the buttons. And we give the rule, the CSS that we want to use. So for the example, I have chosen to display none, and in this case all the buttons are getting hidden. As you can see, with the plain HTML element, the button HTML element, I can select all the buttons that you see in this uh, HTML document and make them hidden. I can select using classes. For example, this button has multiple classes. I'll select one class, applet button class. And for classes, we can use dot notification. So if I say dot applet button display none, it it has hidden all the buttons, and but it is still showing a disabled button. If we look at this disabled button element, you can see that uh, it doesn't have the applet button class, but it has applet button disabled class, dis. So if I want to hide this also, I can use a comma, and I would say dot applet button dis. So we can use a comma to have multiple elements apply the same CSS rule. So you can see the other button is also disappeared in the screen. So to select a particular uh, set of elements, we declare the same class to all the elements, and we use the dot notation to identify them and apply a CSS rule. So let me remove this. So now you see all the um, buttons are here. I want to hide a particular element, a particular button. For example, the calculated dates button. You see that it has a separate ID. Now I'm going to use this particular ID, the single identifier for this ID, and make the button disappear. To use your ID, we have to use the hash key, and I would say display none. Now you see that the button is gone. So for IDs, we use the dot. For classes, we use the hash. And apart from this, we can use other elements, and like the attributes that you see here, we can use a set of elements that have the same attributes and make them uh, and style them. For example, I see two required fields here, and I select the element, and I see that the area required is the common attribute to identify both the HTML elements. So this is one input tag. This is the other input tag, and it has the same area required true. So I'm going to use that particular attribute. To select an element by an attribute, we use square brackets to enclose all the elements. Um, so I'm going to say now you see the elements are getting disappeared. I can make I can assign some border color, border radius to identify the required fields. We can use border color attribute. I'm using the important keyword because I want to override what Siebel is providing by default. So now you see it has a border here with blue color, or rather I would say white. You see a clear difference here. So now it worked when I added the input tag, but it didn't work when it is just the attribute, because if you look at the particular element here, the element has multiple properties that are defined, and if the number of selectors are more, the rule is going to get applied. For example, I will look at the border here, and I see that the border color is defined in one rule which has CBUI control input class. Now this is just one selector, one class selector, and mine is also one attribute selector, and both are important. I have given important here, and this is also important. So for my rule to take precedence, I'm both the elements has one common thing, that is the input tag. Both are input tags, so I'm going to use that input also to make uh, this rule take into the precedence. Now we have input tag selector along with the attribute selector. So this rule will get precedence, and you see the border is made into blue. So if I don't give a space to the element, then it will search for the elements that has both the rules, that um, that element should have both the attributes to it. For example, all the anchor tags with drill down elements, you can see that a dot. For here I can again mention the button with ID like this without a space. So um, with space, it will start looking into the child elements. So in CSS, if I say I'm going to this section, this is a section, a group of buttons. So this is the class, and under this class I want to select all the buttons. So I'm going to write a CSS like this. Under this class, I've used the dot notation. I'm going to look for all the buttons, and I'm going to make the background color red. If you look at this, I have added a space, and that space means it will look for all the child elements beneath this parent class. Now we can also use the greater than symbol that will look for the immediate children. So I have an immediate child just beneath this class that will get selected. But if I give a space, it will look for all the child elements under it and all the grandchild and so on beneath the tree. So any element under this class, anywhere in the tree structure, in the HTML DOM structure, will get selected. And we can use sibling selectors. For example, this field has a sibling right next to it. You can see the drop down button, the drop down icon that you see. This is actually a sibling to this input field. This is the input field, and this is the sibling. And you want to select this particular sibling and give it some different style. To select the sibling, we can use the plus notation or tilt icon, notation. So let me take this example. So I'm going to use the name attribute. Let I'm selecting all the input tag which has the name attribute. After that, I'm selecting its sibling, that is the span element with drop down class. And you see I have hidden the drop down here. So I can use a plus notation in CSS to select the siblings. We can also use the tilt. Uh, Plus looks for the immediate sibling next to it, and tilt looks for all the siblings next to it. So if I have multiple siblings to this input tag, we can use the tilt selector. So my intention in this session is to introduce you to different selectors and how to select the CSS. I hope this helped you in identifying uh, Siebel vanilla JS files and web templates. Add all the classes, the IDs, and attributes to all the HTML elements that we see in the UI. So it's more like we identify the pattern, we identify the selectors that group the different elements that we want to select together. Like I said, the both the required fields have one common attribute, like area required is equal to true. So we identified that particular common class, attribute or ID, something that is common for a group of things that we want to change together, and we give them a particular style. To understand more on the different styles that we see here, the colors, background images, display options, I would recommend you to look at w3schools.com to get more about CSS and to learn more on how to style your application. Now, CSS doesn't just add colors or just doesn't just make your application look pretty. It has a lot of more options to make your application behave like uh, uh, a different behavior for different devices. We can use media queries to identify the window size of your application and behave differently for mobile devices, tablet devices, for desktop applications. We can add content, we can add data to a particular element, the content. We can add images, we can have a background image across some element. So that will all come under advanced CSS. So if you are interested in learning more about the CSS, please check w3schools.com. Thank you.